Ag PhD full episodes and more are now available on Acres TV, the newest ag platform connecting you to fields of information. Look for us on watchacrestv.com.
During our Farm Basics time today, our topic is drying grain.
Oh, it brings back so many good memories, Brian, doesn't it? Lack of sleep, watching things all night, worrying. Man, running those grain dryers, that was good times in your past.
So one of my jobs on the farm for 20 years was drying every single bushel of corn that we had. Our dad was a big believer in, I don't care what the moisture of the corn is we're pulling out of the field, it's all running through the dryer because I want it dry. We may store it until the next summer. And so that's really where this conversation starts. So if you are a non-farmer, here's what we mean by this. We put grain into bins. And in order for that grain to store properly, it has to be down to a certain moisture. So for our dad, he wanted to store the grain a long time, and he said, I want that grain clear down to 12% in a lot of cases, 13% at the most in terms of corn. So I would have to dry this corn so it was down into the 12 to 13% moisture range, and then we didn't have to worry about spoilage of that grain.
Well, that was really important because we were going to use that corn all through the summer until we got the next corn crop in the fall because we were feeding livestock. And when you've got animals that need food, you got to have the feed on hand. So we wanted to keep that corn, at least a little bit of the corn, all the way until the next fall.
Well, even if we weren't going to feed it to livestock, and I mean, quite frankly, when I was the one in charge of drying grain, it wasn't going to livestock. It was going to an ethanol plant or a grain elevator or something like that. But the thing is, if you're going to store that grain for a long time, it's got to be at a good moisture level. So that's really what we're talking about today. So I don't care what the grain is. Like in our farm, we've raised oats, wheat, corn, soybeans, and a few other crops. Anytime you're going to store grain, it has to be down to a certain moisture percent or less. Otherwise, it can get moldy, it can spoil, and all of a sudden this grain that you thought was worth thousands of dollars is now worth nothing.
And you might ask, well, why don't you just leave it in the field longer? Let it dry down in the field. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes that could work, but more times than not, it really doesn't. The crop will get to a certain moisture level and it might just sit there. The other thing is the plants may not be able to stand long enough to get the moisture down that low, especially if you've got some issues with your stalks on corn or something like that. So farmers typically like to get harvesting when that grain is still a little bit wet, especially if they have the ability to dry that grain down.
Well, the biggest reason why we want to get the grain when it's a little bit wet is we have a lot less harvest loss. The longer we let the grain sit out there in the field, the more chance animals have to eat it, but the bigger thing is the more chance it just falls down on the ground. So we've got to get it when it's relatively wet, and then we bring it in, and if we're going to store it for a while, we're definitely going to dry it when it's corn. With soybeans, we actually have fans on our bins that can pull some of that moisture out over time. So we have different ways that we can dry grain, but it is really important to make sure that we're checking our grain bins and we have grain at the right moisture if we want to store it.
Now, there are a lot of things you have to do right if you want to be successful farming. One of those things is controlling our weed of the week. Can you identify this week's weed?